Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Conway Stone. I'm the chairman of the board of the Academy of Preachers, and we are so grateful that you're here this evening. Can I ask you, how do you start a movement? How do you start a revolution? Well, it starts with an idea. It starts with an idea in one person. It starts with an idea in one person that is then translated to other people. But you cannot do it alone. You have to have around you some partners that make things happen. And this evening, we want to celebrate a number of partners who have been with AOP since the very, very beginning. Dwight Moody has been a part of trying to make this happen, and he has gathered around him some very, very special people. At this time, we want to take a moment to honor the Archdiocese of Louisville. Led by Archbishop Joseph Kurtz and Vice General Martin Lineback, the Archdiocese of Louisville has been engaged, reliable, and an inspiring partner to the Academy of Preachers from the very first day until now. Their choir of the cathedral sang at the inaugural festival. The cathedral has hosted the festivals of 2011 and 2012. Cathedral Pastor Jeff Nichols and Archbishop Kurtz has been plenary preachers. And they were also featured in a memorial video that we did that was sent to Pope Francis. Several of their young preachers have been prominent roles in this festival. For all of this and for so much more, we want to stop and say thank you to the Archdiocese of Louisville. This is the award that we are giving to all of our partners this evening, and we wanted you to take a moment to be able to see this world sitting on the platform here, representing the revolution that we're trying to start, the movement that we're trying to start, and at this point we want to stop and say thank you to the Archdiocese of Louisville. So they were our partner of the decade. Our professor of the decade is Miss Alice McKenzie. For most of the decade, Miss Alice McKenzie has been an enthusiastic advocator of the Academy of Preachers. Not only has she brought her students, she has served as a coach and lead master classes. She's led master classes. She has preached the memorial sermon, a memorable sermon in 2013. Entitled, Welcome to Tucson. Her lectures and sermons and books have inspired and educated thousands. Together with her colleagues at Perkins School of Theology and Highland United Methodist Church, both in Dallas, they hosted the memorable 2015 Festival of Young Preachers. At this time, would you help me welcome Miss Alice McKenzie.
Several years ago, I was having dinner at Papado's in Dallas with Sandra Willoughby, the author of the wonderful book, The Right Stuff, which my class was reading the next day. And I said, Sandra, what advice do you have for my students? And she said, tell them that there is no higher privilege than to preach the gospel. So I told them, there is no higher privilege than to preach the gospel. And I feel that way about preaching. It seems that you do too. And I feel that way about the privilege and the honor that you do to me in offering this award. And I want to thank you for that. To me, preaching has always been a craft, and preaching has always been an art, and it is first and foremost an action of God. And I am so grateful that I've been able to participate over the years in various ways in the work of the Academy of Preachers. Because to me, this is what the Academy of Preachers is dedicated to, preaching as a craft. Think about the last few days. Preaching as an art, because you got to know the rules before you break them. And preaching, first and foremost, as the action of God. And I want to thank you for all that the Academy does, all you who participate, leaders and participants in that. Now, speaking of preaching as a craft, an art, and an action of God, since you gave me an award and let me have a microphone, just a moment of personal privilege, I would say that if I were to give you advice, and myself, about what is most important today in preaching, I would quote the group of people at my home church in Allen, Texas. I commissioned them to come up with a sermon evaluation form to listen to my students in a service at their church. And I'll say what they told me, and then I'll ask permission later to see if it was appropriate for the setting. But they said, we would like to know what the hell the preacher's talking about. They want clarity. I did my doctoral work in Proverbs, and so I'm always thinking about how we can boil things down. And so the best piece of advice I would have is that be able to state your sermon in a proverb. Be able to boil it down. And in the next moments, I would like for your amusement, perhaps, and edification, perhaps, to offer 10 homiletical proverbs. And if you want to pick out your favorite, let's see if Dwight will make up some t-shirts. And we can have t-shirts made up. So here they are. There might be 11, but let's not be picky. All right, here's the first one. I'm going to start with the boring ones and get a little more interesting. My students think this one's boring. A clear structure is the best friend to memory. Yeah? All right. The second one is preparation is a sign of respect for your congregation. Flip it over, lack of preparation, right? Number 3, I'm glad you like that one. Number 3, this is from Barbara Brown Taylor. If I give no person that is responsible for it, it's anonymous, which means by Alice. All right, it is better to sit down too soon than to stand up too long. Barbara Brown Taylor. Now here's a Vermont proverb, talk less, say more. It's a cold climate there, their lips are cold. Here's an anonymous proverb. The Holy Spirit is available 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, beyond the preaching moment. This one is claimed by Walter Brueggemann and Fred Craddock. It is a sin to bore people with the Bible. Here's one from Tom Long. When we preach, we think we're handing out eggs, but the Holy Spirit is making omelets. This one is anonymous. It is not all up to you. This one is anonymous. Land the damn plane. Who knew? All right. And one more. This might be 10. I think it's 10. And this one is from the Irish playwright and essayist Oscar Wilde. Are you ready for this one? Be yourself, because everybody else is already taken. A few weeks before he actually was put to death as a martyr, German Lutheran theologian and churchman Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote these words. He said, if I knew that I had a little bit of time, only a little bit of time to live, I would want to preach as often as I could. Because I believe that when I preach, when the preacher preaches, it is as if Jesus Christ himself walks up and down and let's say around the tables, offering comfort and challenge as each person has need. If I knew I had a short time to live, I would want to preach as often as I could. That, to me, is why I'm so grateful for this evening and for all of you, because that is what you do. That is what you do. In attending to the art, to the craft, to opening to the action of God in preaching, what you do and what I have attempted to do in some of my writings is that we, get this, we maximize the possibility that listeners will meet the living Christ. Amen? Amen. So thank you for this honor. Thanks be to God for the Academy of Preachers, and thanks be to God for the privilege of preaching. Thank you.
Well, we're going to honor a musician of the decade. Acclaimed professor, choral director, and opera star Everett McCorvey brought his American Spiritual Ensemble to the National Festival for the first time in 2012. He was so impressed with the young people at this festival. He said, "I have been so inspired. I want to be the musical director for AOP." And he has been so ever since. And so he became, adding to AOP his inspiration collection of national assignments and bringing his world-class vocalist and all the universe, the spirit of the national to this national spirituals to this national festival. Year after year, singing, testifying, leading, and teaching, smiling, and celebrating the talent and the commitment of all of these young preachers, including his own daughter. Would you welcome Mr. Everett McCorvey?
Well, thank you so much. This means a great deal to me. When Dwight called me to ask about being a part of the festival, I think that first year we were not available, I think, the first year, because we were out, the American Spiritual Ensemble was out performing. And, but the next year we sent a few singers, and then the year after that we brought the whole group, and this year they are all up in New York, so we have a concert tomorrow. And so I flew down today so that I could be a part of this. And I was excited about it for many reasons. One, because of you, amazing young people who find friends and hope in society and in the gospel through this festival. And I would leave here thinking that all will be right with the world, with the young people that we have at this festival who will go out and who will preach the gospel and share their joy for preaching. As Conway said, my daughter came to this festival a few times when it was in Lexington, and she decided, because of this festival, she went to seminary school. And so now she's getting a Master's of Divinity at Vanderbilt University. And she preached her first sermon here last year, and it was very, very exciting. The other reason that I was excited about being a part is because, as I told Dwight, I worried a little bit about the future of church music and the future of trained musicians in church settings. We are getting to a point where it's becoming even more difficult to find trained musicians for services. The metropolitan areas will do pretty well, but the rural areas, the black churches, some of the smaller cities, they are looking for trained church musicians. And so I wanted to make sure that as we were engaging young people, that we talked about the importance of church music and the importance of having trained musicians as a part of the service. If you think of the great composers like Bach, like Handel, like Mozart, guess what? They were church musicians. And the church supported them and gave them a place so that they can become creative and create music that's inspired generations for hundreds of years. But it started off in the church. The reason you come here is because you want training. You're learning how to be better ministers. Well, my job is to be a teacher to help young people learn how to be better musicians and learn the language of music. It's a language. And so I hope that as you grow in your own journey, that you will identify and support young church musicians so that this art form won't die, so that it will continue to flourish. The reason I started the American Spiritual Ensemble was because I wanted to make sure that the American Negro spiritual, the stories that go along with the spirituals, and the meaning of the spirituals, and the history of the spirituals, that was not all lost, so that the next generation would learn about that. And so I'm honored tonight because this festival made a statement. They said, we're going to honor a musician and say that the music is important. And so I'm really appreciative of that. I'm very appreciative to have Calista Day and John Wesley Wright here, as well as Dr. Tedrin Blair Lindsay here to be with you for the week. And I thought I would end my little part of this with a little song. So I'm going to ask my colleagues to come up. And now you all can stay up and sing if you like, or you can stay up, or you... And we chose a song because what happens here is that we find light. And so I thought that an appropriate song would be This Little Light of Mine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I'm gonna let it shine all in this room. I'm gonna let it shine all through this room. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Shine.
Thank you, Tedrin, John Wesley, Callie, Everett, thank you for singing, for receiving this honor. But I have something else. Every year, we publish a book of sermons preached by the young people at the festival and many of the plenary preachers. So I want to encourage all of you, first of all, to submit your manuscript. Not necessarily the version you preached, but the version you want published, you know. For some of you, the sermon that you hoped you were going to preach when you got here. So we want to publish it, all right? Send it in. This year, I'm pleased to unveil and distribute today our 10th book of sermons. We've had 9 annual festivals plus 1 commemorative edition of just African American sermons preached at the festival. Some of you will remember that. Worship the Lord was our theme last year. There are 64 sermons by young preachers in the book. Of course, it will be for sale in just a few minutes. We are going to give a copy in just a minute to everyone who's here tonight who has a sermon in the book, and that's going to be free. But this is what I want to say. I have dedicated this book, I serve as editor, I've dedicated this book to Everett McCorvey and the American Spiritual Ensemble. I want to read what I wrote in the preface, and then I want to say this. You don't know this either, Everett, but the introduction to the book was the text of your master class last year, Theology of Hymns, Some Important Questions.
Oh my.
I listened to the whole thing and transcribed it. I had to edit it, you know, improve it along the way there a little bit, but I did transcribe the whole thing and included it as the introduction to the book. It was an education for me just to read it and to transcribe it. But here I wrote, I have included as an introduction to this book the master class presentation by our festival director of music, Dr. Everett McCorvey. I personally transcribed and edited this text also from the video of the event, now posted on our YouTube channel. At the same time, I dedicate this volume to Dr. McCorvey and his wonderful American Spiritual Ensemble. Since the 2012 festival in Louisville, Kentucky, McCorvey and his singers have been an integral part of our festivals, enriching our homiletic gatherings with their wonderful spirit, tremendous talent, and inspirational testimony. I direct you to their website and encourage you to take every opportunity to hear them, to love them, and to sing with them. I surely have, and I appreciate more than I can say the friendship and the gospel partnership that has been a blessing to me these 7 years. It is worth noting that Dr. McCorvey also serves as director of the opera program at the University of Kentucky and as director of the National Chorale in New York City. Here is your volume. God bless you. Thank you. Now, you might want to stand down here, and with President Ernest Brooks, we're going to present these books right now to these. I think there are 13, and I'm going to call your name, and if you're here tonight, come. If you're not here, stay where you are. Richard Williams. Ananias Ward. Is Ananias here? David Telfort. Justin Wade. Brittany Steffen. Jonathan Slocum. Jonathan. Jack Rankin. Oh, Zach. I'm sorry. Instead of thinking, I'm reading what's I'm on the paper here. Columba Manus. Robert Lazowski. Marcus Jones. Where's Marcus? Joseph Howard. Dante Ford. And Jerikas Collins. Thanks to all of you who publish sermons in the books, and please submit your sermons through the AOP office, and we'll publish them and present them next year at the 2019 Festival of Young Preachers.
Okay, we're going to move right along. We do have a few other people to thank for this evening. As well as musicians, as well as professors, there's mentors who make a difference here. And would like to invite Roy up here to introduce our mentor of the decade.
The Reverend Dr. Lawrence Edward Carter Sr. is a teacher, preacher, scholar, pastor, author, historian, curator, and archivist, to name a few of his roles. And those of us who have had the rare privilege to labor beside him in the vineyard, we know him as a larger-than-life, colorful, and unique character. During his 40-year tenure as the founding dean of the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel at Morehouse College, he has built that college chapel into a growing, dynamic, living, and the only religious memorial to the life and legacy of Dr. King. Dean Carter has shaped and nurtured hundreds of young preachers who have been his students and chapel assistants. He has motivated and renewed thousands of preachers, scholars, and activists through his work with the Martin Luther King Jr. College of Ministers and Laity. And he has inspired and touched literally tens of thousands of people of all faiths and nationalities through the global reach of the Gandhi King Akeda Institute. Dean, these legions of ambassadors of peace for the beloved world community are your magnum opus, and we honor and celebrate you for all of your service. But I want to highlight one particular aspect of your ministry, especially for the young preachers who are here tonight, because you have modeled by your example for these generations of preachers and lay leaders, through your faith and fidelity to the teaching and life example of Jesus and Dr. King, how to build bridges of understanding between faiths, cultures, national identity, and the other divisions of humanity that we have created. All the while, deepening, honoring your own faith and traditions and heritage. Dean, on behalf of all of the ambassadors of peace that you have touched, inspired, and sent out into the world to build the beloved world community, we salute you. Can you please join me?
After the professor, I wished I could make you laugh. She was beautiful. Ernest and Dwight and Roy and all the rest of you, I feel like that turtle you saw sitting on top of the white picket fence. You know it didn't get there by itself. I have been doing for the last 39 years at Morehouse what I have enjoyed, and I'm truly thrilled that some of you think that it has been helpful. I actually started praying at the age of 15, and I'm not quite sure what motivated me, but the most consistent prayer that I have prayed has been that I would help strengthen the future church of Jesus Christ. And I've always wanted to turn out a large number of learned men and women to be the future leaders of the church. Now, those of you who know me know that I have done extensive research for this speech. And I'm tempted to give it, but I'm going to spare you, and I'm just going to make a few comments about a couple of bullets that I have on here, this tablet. If you've been watching the news, you know that we've got some real challenges. And if you begin with the premise that religion is responsibility, or it is nothing at all, then you will hear what I heard today for the first time as being a very sober announcement. But I learned, I think, this morning, that Christianity is losing 4,000 churches a year. That figure may not surprise some of you, but it is actually startling to me. Because one verse that I have stared at in the scriptures, longer than I have stared at any one verse, is the one that says, "And the gates of hell shall not prevail against the church." When I hear statistics like the one I just quoted, I become very nervous because I think I hear the gates swinging. We've got a couple of challenges that can be easily resolved if we have the courage and the will. So one thing I want to leave you with is my sincere belief that difference and diversity should not be held in isolation, but in relationships. If you keep difference and diversity isolated, it won't be helpful to anybody. That is where bias, stereotypes, and prejudice begin. But if you hold difference and diversity in relationships, everybody will win. I think, secondly, I want to say to you that I'm thoroughly convinced that we will never have world peace until the church understands something that Jesus said on a very personal level. I want to say it two ways. We've got to say in our preaching that who we are, who you really are, all the time, can never be separated from the most sacred thing in the universe. Did you hear that? Now let me say the same thing in the words of Jesus. If you have seen me, you have seen the Father. For the Father and I are one. There is no separation. Now here's what the church has had a hard time buying. They think that when Jesus said that he was only talking about himself. But Jesus was talking about everybody. And that's why the season we have just come out of, Christmas, is so important. It is the greatest affirmation of our humanity in the history of the world's religions. The incarnation of God. I think my 3 minutes are up. And I have a whole lot more on here that I would love to tell you. Well, it's not mine. It was sent to me yesterday, one of the things, by Dr. Delman Coates. He sent me something that Mark Wainfield said. He said, the church basically will be all right if preachers could teach their congregations 3 words: we are wrong. And then he lists the 7 things that we're wrong on. I'll just leave you hanging.
guess I know who's going to be the most popular person after this banquet is resolved. If you're a preaching organization, you might want to honor a preacher of the decade. Dwight did not choose me. He chose another person. Amos, come up here.
Thank you, Conway. Dr. McCorvey and Dr. Carter have called our attention to questions of decline while exhorting us to fulfill potential that can reverse those declines in music programs and competencies and in the performance, if you will, of our churches, led by pastors who are preachers. There was a book in the year 2000 that appeared under the auspices of Lilly Grant Money called Dinosaur Heart Transplants, Renewing Mainline Congregations. And the author was none other than Bob Cuny, then the pastor of the unfortunately named Country Club Christian Church, Disciples of Christ of Kansas City at 61st and Ward Parkway. A church that for 50 years had about 3,000 members and probably still does, a strong church. And Dr. Cuny is very clear in that book about the potential. He studied several congregations, some of which had not bounced back from their decline, others that had. And he was upfront about his identity and his call. And he said he always knew, as a cradle disciple, I believe from Ohio, that he was called to pastor tall, steeple, mainline congregations. And that's exactly what he did. And after he did this survey, he went on and became president of Lexington Theological Seminary and was a predecessor of our own Cherise Gillette, who's been facilitating with us. Well, we have a preacher tonight who's the preacher of the decade. And I might have a vocal cord infection, which is why my voice sounds like this. I feel great, and it's not contagious. But I would not have traded this opportunity for anything to be able to honor a woman who, for the last decades, has developed a ministerial touch that has gone from one key vineyard to another and has managed to activate the faith of the people in congregation after congregation. We're honoring this evening as the preacher of the decade, the Reverend Dr. Amy Butler. And you can read that Dr. Butler has prepared herself academically, a graduate of Baylor, of the International Baptist Seminary in Switzerland, which moved to Prague. And then finally, the Doctor of Ministry at Wesley Theological Seminary in our nation's capital. But it's her fascinating background, a native of Hawaii, studied in Texas and Switzerland and then Washington, D.C., called to the unusual American city of New Orleans as an associate pastor of the great St. Charles Avenue Baptist Church, then to Calvary Baptist Church of Washington, D.C., as senior pastor, a woman of a very, very, very historic congregation. At one point, at the same time, two different members of that church were serving simultaneously as the head of the American Baptist Churches and the Southern Baptist Convention, two different people in the same congregation. Dr. Butler made a mark over more than 10 years in Washington as a thoughtful, responsible faith voice who met people where they were. The Calvary Church grew spiritually, embraced the community around it, embraced the demographic changes in Washington, D.C., became more of an inclusive, multi-ethnic, multicultural church, a more interracial church, and a church that took denominational leadership in taking various positions and taking them publicly that were in keeping with their history. The American Baptist churches were essentially founded, organized in that building. And then people took note. They saw the marvelous work that she was doing, mostly through her preaching. It was the way God used her and her ability to connect with people and her ability to understand her own heritage and her own environs that got the attention of the Riverside Church in New York City, where this year she will celebrate 5 years as senior pastor. And when she got called, I was a member of a sister church across town in Washington, and we were excited and happy for her. We knew her reputation in Washington was sterling as a preacher and as a shepherd. And we were sad to see her leaving Washington, but we knew that she could handle it because Riverside is a church where you don't just preach, you hold forth. And I went there on the fourth Sunday of Advent 2 or 3 years ago and felt the presence of the Lord under the power of her preaching. This is a very important award that we give because this is a house of preachers, this academy. And in so many ways that I don't have time to go into, the Reverend Dr. Amy Butler embodies the best of this calling. Reverend Dr. Amy Butler, thank you. Please come so that we can honor you.
Thank you. That was very overwhelming, and it's quite an honor to be here tonight. I will not be singing a song for you. You are welcome. When I think about the task and the challenge and the responsibility and the honor of preaching, of proclaiming the gospel, I cannot help but remember the interview that I had with the search committee at Calvary Baptist Church when they were thinking about calling me to be senior minister. I had never been a senior minister before. I was an associate for a few years before that. And the committee forgot to ask me how many sermons I had preached. They did not know that I had preached 4 sermons in my entire life. But they hired me anyway. And I remember the 3rd Monday as senior minister at Calvary Baptist Church. I was like, I have said everything I know. I have nothing else to say. So God bless the people of Calvary Baptist Church who suffered through all of that. And thanks be to God for the many mentors who took me under their wings and helped me learn to become a preacher. I have 2 very strong convictions about preaching. One is we live in this moment where the institutional church is in decline. I think it's so exciting because we are at a point of desperation where we can begin to step out into bold expressions of the gospel that we have not been able to do or willing to do before because of the confines of the institution. This is our moment, and in order for us to go there, we're going to need some really good preachers. Because the strongest tool that we have to lead the institutional church into the future is the preaching task. So those of you who are working so hard to hone your voices and your skills as preachers, thank you, because you will be the ones leading us. The other thing that I deeply and firmly believe about preaching, I have learned most deeply at the Riverside Church, and that is our world is in crisis. Our country is in a crisis. People are scared. We don't know who we are, we don't know what we stand for, and we don't know how to live in community and in relationship with each other. Where can the leadership for the future come? It can come from the church, but it will only come from the church if the people who are proclaiming every single week have the courage to do it prophetically and powerfully and bravely. So thank you so much to the Academy for this great honor. It gives me so much hope to see all of your faces and to hear all about the work that you've been doing, because I know that the future is in good hands and you will preach us there. Thank you.
It has been a real pleasure tonight to hear personally from 4 of our 6 honorees. The Vicar General of the Archdiocese of Louisville, Kentucky, intended to be here, That is my longtime good friend, Martin Leinbach, who has been on our board and has been to many of our events. He called this week to say that his sister had died, and the funeral mass is this weekend. This was a special burden to Martin because earlier last year, not even a year ago, his father died. Later in the year, his mother died. And he is carrying a very heavy burden, and he suggested that we, as an academy, schedule an event in Louisville later this year to honor the Archdiocese, and this is what we intend to do. The other person who could not be here tonight is our donor of the decade. Her name is Pat Ayers. She is in Austin, Texas, and she has been a silent, generous benefactor of the Academy of Preachers. 10 years ago, when we started, we had two things. We had a big idea, and we had a big donor, the Lilly Endowment of Indianapolis, Indiana. They've given us over $3 million during the decade. But their strategy is to help organizations launch and find their own way, almost like parents launching their children into the world. The generosity of the Lilly Endowment to the Academy of Preachers comes to an end on June the 30th of this year. This, of course, pushes us as an organization in some very strong ways. We are facing a future that we do not yet know what shape it will take. But in those 10 years, the Lord has given us a whole handful of other gifts. We now have an institutional network that reaches from coast to coast. Institutions that believe in what we're doing, that send their students, that send their representatives, that want to see us flourish. Second, we have a network of young preachers. Somewhere between 900 and 1,000 young preachers have come to our 10 national festivals of young preachers. More than that, have attended our regional, denominational, and campus festivals, including events that we don't even know about. Groups will schedule a festival of young preachers. Sometimes we hear about it, sometimes we don't. Hundreds of young people have been touched, inspired, networked, and supported in ways that we can't even calculate. We have this enormous network. Third, we have, shall I say, a brand that is both visual and verbal. A mission to identify, network, support, and inspire young people in the call to gospel preaching. With our inspiration bubbles and our red and green with a slice of orange. People everywhere see it and know it. These are great gifts to have that we have after 10 years. So we are preparing for AOP 2.0. We're preparing for a new decade of ministry and mission, but we need your help. In some ways, now more than ever. We need you to be partners. We need you to be donors. We need you to be advocates. We need you to be volunteers. We need you to be mentors. We need you to be young preachers and older preachers. We need you to be partners with us. And it's my challenge tonight to all of you to find a way under God, in the Spirit, for the glory of Christ to help us in our mission. This is not something we want to control. We have not trademarked things. We're trying to start a movement. We want people to take our ideas and our practices and our events, make them their own, stir up some gospel preachers where they are. We want you to do that. Part of the purpose of this banquet is to have this inspiration and take it home with us. And one of the persons that has made this possible is Pat Ayers of Austin, Texas. Her husband died this year. He was one-time president of University of the South in Swanee, Tennessee. They have been very devout Baptist and Episcopalian benefactors for gospel work all over the country. Here's what we're going to do for her in her absence. Some of you remember and participated in the video that we sent to Pope Francis. How many of you were in Lexington when we made this video? Very few of you. Well, we made a video and sent it to Pope Francis asking him to host at the Vatican the first international festival of young preachers. Now, all of you know that things in the Catholic Church move kind of slow. So we have not given up on a positive response from the Vatican on this request. But we're going to do tonight what we did then. We're going to make a video of thanks and send it to Pat Ayers.